so underrated. It's cinematic.
All right, so reactions and all that stuff we'll go over here in a moment, and Sam talk about more of his favorite scenes.
Yeah.
He can do creative portrayals as you were doing. So the big thing for Cuckoo's Nest is Thursday next week is when we'll do the TWA.
Wait, Mr. Kane. Yeah, can we say hi to Kira really quick?
Hi, Kiara.
Hi, Kira.
Hi, Kira.
I hope you had fun on your round trip. You would understand that if you were here. Oh my god.
That was my uncle's plan.
Oh really?
He would go. He's like, I want a round trip ticket. They would say, where? Here. There's some truth to it. So Thursday next week, rhetorical analysis TWA. Again, you won't know prompt. More so, I don't know. We might start touching on some devices today. I'm thinking that's going to be more of a next week thing, and we'll go back into it. So while you won't know the prompt, though, you'll have a pretty good idea as to thematic possibilities and whatnot. So you're not going to be coming in completely blind. And just remember that you're not going to be forced to use any specific rhetorical device. So it's not that you can go, oh, I would love to write about imagery, but he's making me use motif or something along those lines. You'll be able to pick whatever kind of devices that you ultimately want to do. Okay? You're not going to be using the book. And so, and you would still be able to like mention specific details coming from it. There's just no need for you to quote. So, not saying they could not be done, things like syntax, diction, you probably would be less likely to use since you would have been quoting word for word. But imagery, like mechanical imagery, that kind of stuff, you'd certainly still be able to reference and point to. Two-body paragraphs would be the minimum, expectation. You might be able to kind of get into three, but it'll never go where you have to have at least three-body paragraphs. As long as you always have two. And I would think that this one, getting at least a couple examples for each one shouldn't be too bad. But there's nothing for Monday that you are required to do. There's nothing for Tuesday that you are required to do. So aside from reading your TWA, and now you have independent reading book, which I mean, you begin whenever you want to do that. The idea is that's your thing, and she'll be taken care of over break. So where do we begin with parts 3 and 4 here?
Okay.
Does Sam have something that he wants?
I had Divvies. I had my hand up first.
He had Divvies. You had Divvies.
You notice how
Sometimes I feel like I'm in like AP 5th grade. If that's a thing.
I think this time.
The one year not here, I taught 7th grade first period, followed by AP Lit, which was mostly seniors, second period. So it was literally going from Ricky Ticky Tacky to like Hamlet.
That's Ricky Ticky Tacky.
Ricky Ticky Tacky.
It was Tabby, that's right.
Yeah.
The Monkey's Paw, I think we read.
Monkey's Paw was. I like Monkey's Paw. Yeah, love that thing.
Hey.
All right, so
Divvies.
can we talk about something?
Yeah.
So I think that when Chief escaped the Combine, I think he was actually like cured. Like I think not only was he able to overthrow the control, but like he also like cured his illness.
I don't think he cured his illness. He maxed it for
Well, I mean, yeah, his curedness was ill. Might be a better way of putting it.
his curedness.
His illness was cured. Sorry guys. All right, 7:45 in the morning.
AP 5th grade.
Uh-huh.
All right, so like, well, what's his illness?
Like he like is paranoid of like big machine.
PTSD.
Well, yeah. I guess.
So what would be, and we could debate, you could end up kind of doing like a DRQ if you wanted to, is he truly cured at the end of the book? And that's something that we don't know for sure. He certainly is at least kind of freed, at the end of the book. And you could argue whether he does it or whether McMurphy does it. From his escape from like a literary standpoint, and this would be something that could end up being useful from a rhetorical device, what does Kesey do to kind of make that escape as symbolic as he possibly could? So he is asserting his control, and the fact that you no longer really have to kind of deal with the Combine as much, but he asserts his control by lifting up the control panel and throwing it out, out the window. Certainly the fact that it is the control panel, the combine, he's concerned with control all the time is going to be a big deal. And also the fact that he's able to physically lift the control panel is symbolic that he is now
Big.
He's big. He's no longer Big Nurse. Big Nurse has kind of been brought down to a more human level, but we are North Hills. We love our big chief. Basically we got the big chief now. And then there's a subtle little thing that he does right before he leaves with McMurphy where he can tell that he is now big.
Is it that he walks past the black place like mom?
Not it's not the one that I'm thinking of, but certainly he's no longer fearful of black boys or anything like that. He goes to put the hat on, and the hat is too small. And so before McMurphy is as big as they get, I could never wear a hat like that or something. But now he feels that he is up to the bigger standard, the bigger size. So RPM's hat is too small. So the fact that he is now, he's come to size. He's no longer the person who just couldn't move the control panel or then kind of move it 6 inches a little bit, where McMurphy would be able to win the bets. But now he's able to lift up the control panel. He's much larger. The hat is too small, so he's kind of puffed back up to what he was before. I think it was, your reading check was yours that mentioned what's different about the last shock therapy?
Yeah.
He can now.
Wake up.
He gets out of the fog. He's not in there nearly as long. So the whole fishing trip, the whole dealing with McMurphy, the fact that he can talk, and interact with people, certainly there's growth with his character. Since he has changed so much from a character standpoint, and I'm thinking literary term device, we would use Chief as what kind of character? He's not a static character.
Dynamic.
He's not a flat character. He's a dynamic character. So there's certainly change that's taking place in him that is going to be significant. So the use of him as a narrator becomes very significant for Kesey because you're able to get a change in his perception, change in his perspective, change in the actions that he's able to do. So you absolutely see that there has been some definite growth that has taken place. You already got to talk.
You're right. That's a good question.
So I want to talk about the symbolism of laughter and the power of voice and stuff like that in the book. Because the first thing that McMurphy does when he walks into the day room is he just greets everybody.
You're on back to part one, when he first enters. Yeah.
So he walks in and he has a really booming voice. He's laughing all over the place. The chief is just so it's been so long that he's heard a voice like that, some booming, really assertive tone that it kind of takes him off guard. And throughout the book, I think Kesey does a good job of incorporating that the guys are starting to laugh more and talk more. I also think he does it well with the characters because Chief doesn't talk at all. He's portrayed as a very meek character who needs someone like McMurphy to help him speak again. Billy has a stutter. That proves that he's kind of very I guess I don't want to say he has trouble talking. He just has trouble talking, which means he's very not as powerful.
Timid.
Yeah, he's very timid. The nurse is very cold and stuff like that. McMurphy has this big voice, and at the end, after McMurphy chokes out Nurse Ratched, after he chokes her, she can't talk anymore. She has to write a notepad, and all her power is gone. Her power lies within her voice, and she can't talk. She has to write on a notepad, and just doesn't do the same thing. The guys just don't respect her.
Power lies within her voice. Power lies within that she's kind of viewed as an extension of the machine, of the combine. Very robotic, very mechanical. And you were talking about with the film where she is very flat character so far as voice and things like that. The other thing that McMurphy does, literally exposes her, and
Shows that she's human.
And it shows that she's human. And it kind of takes away part of that power mystique that she has, where it's kind of she's one of us, so to speak. But the laughter is a big thing because certainly, this is human to laugh, and I think laughter is even a pretty good defense mechanism, which we use all the time, and sometimes it could be a serious situation, and ways that we deal with it. Sometimes we just try to laugh it off. Doesn't mean we completely forget about it or don't give it any importance, but it's a defense mechanism that we use, which they've been completely stripped down of that defense mechanism completely. Chief even talks about his dad would laugh. And when the government officials would first come with the hydraulic dam and things like that, he would sometimes kind of laugh them off, to play them as a fool a little bit before the land ends up getting sold. So McMurphy bringing that laughter, it kind of something that causes Chief to start thinking again, to start looking at as people as him being human again. But no, in some ways you could almost argue that McMurphy kind of brings like quote unquote the gospel of laughter to them. And it's almost like a new belief for them. And it culminates with the fishing trip, because all hell breaks loose on the fishing trip, plus then the party that they have at the end, where they're going to be laughing that off as well. So yeah, they become human when they do those things. They realize that, and I think Harding does a good job of this at the end when he's trying to explain to McMurphy why he's there, because he just felt shame. Always felt that 1,000 fingers were pointing at me, that were calling me out, basically making me feel shameful. But now I might be scared at times, I might be ill at times, but we're no longer sick rabbits, we're no longer timid rabbits, we might be sick men, but we know at least that we're men. So McMurphy bringing the laughter infuses some life into them. I don't want to say necessarily infuses joy into them at all times, but makes them realize that they are men, that they are people, and they demand some respect. Now, is he planning that the whole time? No. I wouldn't say when he comes in, we're going to make this swashbuckling group of patient men, by going on a fishing trip. But he's certainly able to infuse that kind of thing into them. But yeah, the power of laughter, and even just like the fact that McMurphy's a gambler. Gambling ends up kind of being a big part of what's happening, because really, him and the nurse are basically upping the ante the whole time. They're having big bets throughout, and in some ways, the men are kind of gambling with, are we going to start to kind of take a stand here a little bit? And so that whole gambling, laughter, the brashness of McMurphy is something that sort of kind of starts to rub off on.
How old is Chief?
We don't know for sure. We know if Chief, so the setting would be like late 1950, let's say 1960 approximately. So he was in World War II. So you figure he's part.
Didn't say he fought in Korea.
No, McMurphy fought in Korea. McMurphy's 35, fought in Korea. We know Billy's 31. We know Nurse is about 50. Chief fought World War II, so he's probably 25 then, at about 15, 16 years, probably early 40s. So they're all pretty close. Billy comes off as being like a 15-year-old. And part of it's probably just the name Billy and the fact that his mom is such a dominating figure over him. But yeah, Billy's 31, so all of them would pretty much be 30s, 40s. And you're going to have, the colonels, the old guy. But he hasn't been on the war nearly as long because he can come in until he was much older. Maria, did you have something earlier?
Yeah, it was when we were talking about Chief, and I was just gonna say, I feel like the institution is probably the worst place they could put those guys, because it just kind of like makes all of their problems bigger, it seems, and it doesn't solve anything. They just feel even weaker than they would in regular society.
Well, and I think that's where the whole, at the very beginning of introducing the text, referred to it as being an allegory. And so when you have an allegory, you're having a abstract, symbolic representation. So characters, settings, actions have a literal but also an abstract kind of meaning to it. The hospital, whether you want to call it the hospital or the combine, it would still be the same thing in this case. The hospital, the combine, you could either look at it as probably doing one of two things. Exposes weaknesses, probably especially the case within Harding, and I'd say weaknesses quotation marks because what they consider to be weaknesses aren't truly weaknesses, or at least does little to help those outside of the mainstream. Now, from a literal standpoint, yeah, the hospital is a terrible place for them to be, and you get a lot of mental health reform because of the book, because of the movie. Certainly helps with it when you have a visual. But the whole allegorical idea is, okay, the hospital, the combine exposes weaknesses or does little to help those outside of the mainstream, out those of quote unquote, main culture. Well, really, America, the country, tends to do little to help those who are outside of the mainstream. And you think about, 1959, 1960, 61, 62, you're right in the middle of civil rights movement. You haven't had the March on Washington or any of that kind of stuff yet. So from a social standpoint, government hasn't done much to help with minorities. You haven't done a whole lot yet to help with gender roles and things like that. You certainly are getting a stratification starting to take place between the wealthy and the middle class and the poor at this point. So Kesey's really kind of using the hospital as a representation, microcosm of what's happening in the United States at this point. So it does very much become an anti-establishment, anti-government, counterculture kind of book in that way, where you're not doing anything to help those who are in need. I wouldn't say it's necessarily meant to, therefore, make Nurse Ratched blame all the problems on women or blame all the problems on a certain group, but those in authority, those in power, those in control are doing a whole lot to help individuals who aren't bad people, who aren't weak people, who don't really have anything wrong with them, but they feel like they don't have anything that's going for them since help isn't being provided whatsoever.
I don't know how like everybody else like felt about this, but like I loved the ending of the book. Like after like the euthanization of McMurphy. I thought that was so interesting how like all of the different characters decided to leave or stay at the hospital and the different ways that they left. Like Billy died, Chief broke out, Harding left just like you said he was going to. A bunch of them left like legally. And then on his way out,
And against the medical advice, like Fredrickson and Seafeld, you shouldn't leave medically, so we won't go anyway.
yeah.
And
then
and Harding's wife picks him up.
yeah.
From the last person you might expect to come and get him.
Yeah. And then Chief kindly kills McMurphy before he leaves, and the other ones decide to stay. I thought that was interesting.
Puts a lot of his reserve.
Yeah.
Yeah, Scanlon's the only one who can't leave.
Wait, is he the one that's actually like?
He's committed.
Yeah.
He's committed. So Scanlon's there. So at the end you have Chief Martini and Scanlon. Scanlon cannot go. Everyone else would have the ability to. And even them leaving after a nurse comes back, going to your point earlier where her power is pretty much gone, she can't speak, her voice is taken away from her power. The ultimate authority is, I don't need to be here, I don't want to be here, I can leave. Okay, I'm going to leave. And yeah, absolutely heading out. So in ways, McMurphy certainly brings that about for them, where there is a killing that takes place of him. He's euthanized, a mercy killing, and it's certainly when he gets wheeled out after the lobotomy, Chief and them think that he's basically a mannequin. This isn't the real one. His arms were bigger than that. Yeah, they put the tattoos and stuff on him, but that's not him. If he can't be himself, then we're not going to leave him here to basically be a symbol of the oppression. By killing him, by doing the mercy killing, who does he not become that is in the ward? He doesn't become an Ellis type figure, where he's basically made a mockery of, or at least kind of put on display. We're not going to have McMurphy on display. If he can't be the big McMurphy, red McMurphy that we know about, if he's not Mac, then he's not going to be here. Mercy killing's going to take place, and we'll move on. And so by him dying, it still brings freedom about for those others, so he still kind of lives on in that way.
After McMurphy was killed, I know all the religious allusions keep coming back in the end of the book, but whenever Scanlon says, "Is it finished?" was that another reference after?
There are from a religious. There are. Yes, I would say he's kind of tacking onto it. If you think about what Emily's mentioning here, and one of the questions was going to throw out. Oops, don't want that yet. Why do we like McMurphy? if you like McMurphy, not saying everyone has to, because he is a terrible person. You know, when you think about who is the person who has kind of come in, but the way that he ends up getting portrayed,
Jesus.
I mean, no, he's not Jesus, but he certainly, Kesey as a writer certainly aligns him with that. I mean, at the very least, he becomes a what? I'm thinking of an M.
Martyr.
He becomes a martyr in that he dies for the cause, whether or not that's something that he truly wants to do, but portrayal of McMurphy. And this could be stuff, you know, going all the way part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. He is a martyr. Dies for his beliefs in a way. And you could certainly say that what does his death do? It ends up being a saving grace, a sacrifice.
So Chief killed him so he wouldn't become a martyr.
No, he became a martyr because.
Oh.
Yeah, I think, but he becomes a martyr, and it keeps him from becoming that example of, you know, the nurse's power. Because if the nurse still has power, if look what I did to him,
Yeah.
he crossed me. Look what happened. Now you can't even use him as an example. Bless you. And honestly, most of the people who would remember the struggle at this point have left. So there's not even anyone to talk about, you know, the battle between her and McMurphy in some ways, because all those people have kind of left, and they can even kind of do their own little version, their own little story. But he certainly sacrifices himself.
So in a way he won. Because
Yeah.
everyone left. Like even though he died, he won.
Yeah.
So was there any?
Well,
No, I was just gonna say like he didn't need to save them anymore. He gave them everything they needed to save themselves.
You mean like in the sense that Chief didn't need to kill him?
No, like
Or-
in the sense that like even after McMurphy was like actually after the lobotomy, like he was pretty much gone.
Mhm.
But like he didn't tell the men like you should leave, like they just left on their own. It was like he gave them the tools to stand up on their own.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. To feel confidence with themselves, to realize that the authority figure over them doesn't truly have that kind of power that maybe they thought that she did. Emily, you kind of mentioned Scanlon's line about, you know, it is finished, it is done, and when you do have crucifixion taking place within New Testament, you know, you kind of have Jesus doing similar lines.
Did you say that? What is it? Did you say is it finished? Is that it?
Oops. Yeah. It,
I guess that's your answer.
with the Gospels that you have, yeah, like you'll have, getting them confused. I think it's John where he goes Eloi, Eloi, which is, you know, pretty much going like forgive them, like. But you'll also have where it's John where I think Mark he goes Eloi, Eloi. In John just simply goes it is done and then dies. Yeah, that's John. No, in the book of John. John's gospel is very straightforward, pretty clear depictions as to what's going on. So yeah, like it's over, and then that's it. EST treatment, we already talked about that it's cross-shaped, but what's McMurphy's line? You know, anointest my head with, you know, conduct it, and then when do I get my quote-unquote crown of thorns?
So was there any symbolism with Scanlon and Martini's thing? Other
Well,
than
hold-
the fact that Scanlon literally just
Well, I want to, sort of. I mean, yes, but I want to keep going with what we kind of have here in the sense that Emily bringing up this religious portrayal, allusions. Anything else?
I mean, he died. You could feel like he died to something.
Okay, yeah, so sacrifices.
So I'm watching the
oh,
Yes.
I got one. So like, I don't know. Never mind. I don't know if the twelve was like, great, but like you know how like Jesus died. When Jesus was like put behind in the cave, he was there for so long.
Mhm.
Same thing that kind of had to happen to like McMurphy. But, like going to the disturbed ward, you gotta be like.
Well, not even just the disturbed ward, but he gets wheeled out after a few days. He's there. It's 3 weeks after the whole party takes place.
Yeah.
Before Chief ends up killing him, so the body kind of comes back. No, you don't have a resurrection taking place where McMurphy gets up, but certainly you do kind of have a resurrection in a sense of what's happening with Chief, and a lot of the others are, he's bringing life back to them. Right before he dies, what do they have?
Party.
A file.
They kind of have a last party, last fling, you know, that takes place. What does Billy do to him?
Kills himself.
Why does he kill himself?
He doesn't want his mom.
He doesn't want his mom to know that he slept with the prostitute.
Okay. And so, and before, initially when, you know, aren't you ashamed of yourself? No, I'm not ashamed. And then, well, I'll tell your mother, well, no, you can't, no, he goes right back into the whole stuttering right away. And then he goes, well,
He's Judas.
he made me do it, McMurphy made me do it.
I know that.
He threw McMurphy under the bus.
Although I'm pretty sure that nurse was suspected of as McMurphy.
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty fair thing to have happen. Fishing trip.
Oh, that, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Jeez, my fishing quite a lot.
the part where McMurphy lost that water.
Ellis says to Billy, go be fisher of men before they go off on the trip. Who goes off on the trip?
George.
Like everyone in general.
Everybody.
There's all of them.
McMurphy? And 10 patients,
Dog.
1 doctor,
Well,
1 prostitute.
There's supposed to be 2 of them.
Supposed to be 2. Sandy doesn't show up for this one. Shows up later for our party, of course.
Yeah.
But we got McMurphy and his 12 going on there. Brings laughter to them. I mentioned kind of like his whole gospel of laughter that's going to bring energy and joy and humanity to them. You have the storm that takes place where there's doubting that would be happening with the patients, but they ultimately, who brings the fish in, who is able to steer the boat, it's all the patients. McMurphy is kind of just watching all of this unfold. On the way back from the fishing trip, McMurphy, Chief notices, and even some of the other acutes notice when he gets back that he is looking awfully tired and kind of worn out. When they have their kind of little last supper, last fling, all that happens to everyone before the nurse finds them, before Turkle gets found, they fall asleep. When they go to the Garden of Gethsemane in the New Testament, Jesus gets upset that the disciples are falling asleep, that you can't even stay awake for this long. So I said to you, when you get to parts 3 and 4, it kind of starts to get overtly into your face, which I think is kind of happening here, certainly.
Is Candy like meant to be a Mary Magdalene character?
I think the danger, I think yes. I think the danger becomes, okay, so Kesey's saying that McMurphy, the gambling rapist is Jesus, and then Candy's going to be Mary Magdalene, and Billy's going to be Judas, and Chief's going to be Peter, and you keep building all this stuff on and on. It's not to the point, I would say, of which he wants you to go, he equals these, but it is a salvation story, it's a savior story. And if you're going to have a savior, you need to have basically 2 things. You need to have an antagonist, you need to have an evil force, which you have with Nurse. And I think if you go back to wolf in sheep's clothing, the whited sepulcher that we kind of talked about a little bit in part 1 and 2, this kind of gives a little bit more credence to those things. But you need an evil force, and you need a group of people that need to be saved. And these folks certainly need to be that. So he becomes their savior, and I think to make that as apparent as you can, that's when you include all these little details that would go along with it. But I don't want us kind of going, okay, so really we should do everything that McMurphy does, and we're going to be good human beings. No, but for this group of people, this is the hero, this is the savior essentially that they needed. But yeah, Maria, I forget the question that you asked when we were doing with part 1 and 2, but it was something along the lines of, does Kesey mean to be doing all this kind of stuff? I mean, he's tripping on LSD when he's writing and whatnot. So can we give him that kind of credit for it? I think when you look to see all those details that he then does kind of add, you can see that totally, all right, there is an idea that would certainly be with us.
That's a great essay on it.
No, yeah, keep that. Still need
I didn't check yet.
So we'll go over more stuff on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Bye,
Good
Kira.
talk.
Bye, Kira.
Bye, Kiera.
I'm really?
Bye, Kiera.
I did not realize how many.
Which is it's impressive and twofold in that there are so many, but that they are still
You
kind
don't,
of
like, catch
subtle enough.
It's not like there were 12 on the.
And then the other thing too is it's told from Chief's perspective.
Yeah.
So it's basically a gospel of McMurphy because it's not McMurphy telling the story, but it's one of his believers kind of telling the story. So
I'm just, oh my god. Wow.
Like, I was really
Or you just get into groups.
oh my god.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You just separate.
you